Feel like the captain and the co-pilot now. Check, Matt, we're going live. All systems are going. David Callis, you about ready to start?
Is Rav Jacobson here yet?
Actually, I didn't see him. That's a good question.
What's the head behind his head?
What?
It's my background.
Matt, you're sending out the link to the email? Okay. David Callis, Robert Jacobson. Robert Jacobson, if you're here, please say so.
Sure, it's mostly men on this one.
Nice turnout.
I'm going to be muting everyone right now, and then I'll slowly turn back on the people who need to be back on. One moment. Okay, David, I don't know if Rabbi Jacobson is with us.
Okay, I'll begin. If Jacobson comes before I finish speaking.
Okay, hold on. I just in the meantime, Matt, Randy, it's nice to see you. Matt, could you please? Okay, it looks like David Blass is calling over Jacobson. Okay, David, we can start. I'm going to start recording. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'd like to welcome the entire Kehillah to what might be the most important part of the Praba process, the part that makes sure that as a Kehillah, we do this right. First of all, I want to welcome the parents of our members. I saw Mr. Bricks, I saw Mrs. Blass, I saw Mr. Sonnenberg, and I want to welcome you and any other parents who I may have missed. In fact, we actually really do miss you. We miss seeing you in shul. You're an important part of our Beis Tefillah family. I like to thank Mrs. Lorraine Blass, for sponsoring tonight's shir. She's a great friend of the shul, and we all know her as the parents of the Blasses, who do so much for our Kehillah. When I say the Blasses, I'm including the parents and the children, the whole Blast team. The shir is in memory of Mrs. Minna Hirsch, her mother, Minna Fega Bas David Zal. She was a Polish-born woman from a Ger Hasidic family. She came to Canada before the war. She kept a kosher Shomer Shabbos home that was an Eshes Chayil, helping her husband build a successful business, aside from being a successful businesswoman herself. She was Zocha Tarichas Yamim, passed away 8 years ago at the age of 95, close to the age of 95. She had a strong love of Eretz Yisrael. She was a Polish religious Zionist from that special era. This year should be a neshama, an aliyah for her neshama. I'd like to, at this time, thank the search committee, Tzvi, Joel, Simon, for all the work they did in getting this process going, so that we're at the point of the Praba. I'd also like to thank my partners on the executive board, to thank David Blass, thank Ari Sonnenberg, and the entire board. I can assure the Kehillah, everyone has worked very, very hard in the last couple of weeks to put this Praba process together. None of us were familiar with the Praba process in normal times, and certainly to create something that never existed before, maybe in history, a Zoom Praba. I think that we've done a great job, Baruch Hashem, and so many people worked so hard on this. And finally, I want to give Hakaras Hatov. Almost finally, I'd like to give Hakaras Hatov to our Rav Jacobson Shlita, for all his work in recent months. I thank him for his Torah, his Chesed, his love and care of our BTUA family. I don't know if Rav Jacobson is here. Is he?
Not yet. He's trying to.
So should I go? Should I? He's
Yeah.
trying, is that?
Yes, he's trying to get in. He's trying to call in.
So hopefully Rav Jacobson will be here shortly to introduce the reason we're gathered here to hear the Divrei Torah and guidance of Agon Rav Zev Leff, Shlita, also our personal connection to him as Yossi's father, we miss him too. And
Rav Jacobson's here now.
he's here? Okay, so thank you. Without further ado, Rav Jacobson, Shlita.
Jacobson, you're muted. Could you please unmute? Very good. Thank you.
On the one hand, when I was asked to introduce Harav Leff, I felt that it was a bit presumptuous, like I should introduce Harav Leff, and everybody knows who he is from before I was born. On the other hand, I decided, Adarabba, this is a covet for me to be able to be associated with Harav Leff, and I think it's very appropriate that this shiur, which I think is a highlight in the shul's history, it is a very, very great Kiddush Hashem that this is the type of shiur our shul wants to have now. I might also add Yasher Koyach to the Bless family, to Mrs. Lorraine Bless for sponsoring this Le'ilui Nishmas, her mother, and I would add that it's also appropriate that it's the Bless family that's behind something like this. Very appropriate. So Yasher Koyach, Harav Leff, we are waiting to hear the Rav's words to be ma'amidas on the Mesilah Ha'ila Beis Kel, a time like this, to be zoichet to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim.
Okay. Want me to start? Can you hear me?
Yes, please. We can hear the Rav.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I would like to dedicate the schus of the Divrei Torah to the Le'ilui Nishmas Mina Fega Bas David. I think if there's no other benefit from a meeting in a shiur like this, is that Talmidei Chachamim Marvim Shalom Ba'olam. Some say what it means is that it gives one common target to the whole Olam, unites them against the Talmid Chacham. So maybe I will be that magnet that in case there's any machlokes or whatever, it'll be all directed against me or something I've said. In this way, it'll bring shalom to the kehillah. If I accomplish that, no. If I accomplish more than that, it'll be also okay. I decided that I would like to split this shiur into 3 distinct parts in order to fulfill the purpose of giving some kind of direction to a proba. The first part will be to discuss what the function of a Rav is. If you have to make a decision on who your Rav should be, you should know what a Rav should be, and then you can decide if the people that are being presented are fit that description. The second part is what are the individual personal cheshbonos that a person can make in deciding who his Rav should be. And the third is probably the most important, and probably the reason I was asked to give this shiur, is how to go about the process and not be over Lashon Hara, Avak Lashon Hara, and Bizui Chachamim, and many other Isurim that could be generated by such a process. We'll start with the function of a leader, the function of a Rav in a Kehillah. When Klal Yisrael thought that Moshe Rabbeinu was no longer around and they needed someone to replace him, they described his job description in the following way. They said, Kum aseh lanu Elohim, make us a power, asher yelchu lefanenu, who will walk in front of us. Moshe Rabbeinu, on the other hand, when he described his job description in Parshas Pinchas, when he asked the Ribono Shel Olam to provide someone to take his place, he described it completely different. Yifkod Hashem Elokei Aruchos Ishav Ha'eda Asher Yetzei Lifneihem V'Asher Yovo Lifneihem V'Asher Yotzieim V'Asher Yivieim. What's the difference between the two job descriptions? Klal Yisrael understood that the tafkid of a leader, of a Rav, is to do it for you. He goes in front of you, and he is a trailblazer, and he does it for you. Well, as Moshe Rabbeinu understood that that's not the purpose of a Rav. The purpose of the Rav is Asher Yetzei Lifneihem, Asher Yodov Lifneihem. He should be the one to impress and give you the kelim to do it yourself. There's a machlokes between the Meiri and the Nemukei Yosef. The Gemara says, Mishayesh lo chola b'sof beiso, someone who has someone ill at home, Rachmana litzlan. So Yelech etzel Chacham v'yivakesh rachim amalav. He should go to a Talmid Chacham, and the Talmid Chacham should daven for that person. That's how the Nemukei Yosef learns the Gemara, Kipshuto. And he says that's why the minig in France was that they would make Mishaberachs by the Kriyas HaTorah by Shabbos, because that's when the Talmidei Chachamim came to shul, and this way they'd be Mekayim, Sheyivakesh Olav Rachamim. They would answer Amen to the Mishaberach and Mekayim der Havacha. The Meiri says a completely different idea. The Meiri said, Mishayesh lo chola b'sof beis, so yelech etzel chacham. The person who has a chola should go to the Talmid Chacham, and the Talmid Chacham will teach you how to daven for the chola. He won't do it. He doesn't have a direct line to the Ribono Shel Olam more than any Jew. But sometimes people don't know how to dial. That's maybe an anachronism these days, or they don't know how to push the buttons, right? So you need somebody to teach you how to push the buttons on the phone. So it could be that the Nemukei Yosef also agrees that ultimately that's the purpose of the leader. But until he can teach you how to push the buttons, the Rachmana litzlan, the person may die. So he'll daven for you until he can teach you how to do it. So Lemaisa, the purpose of a leader is to guide you, to teach you, to be able to bring you up to his level, or at least close to it. Could be for that reason the kapara for the Chet HaEgel, which was a mistake in what a leader is. If a leader is just doing it for you, you can have an Egel do it too. But if a leader is there to teach you and to guide you, then you need a human being who knows who you are and knows what your capabilities are and can help to be an example to bring you up to that level. So what's the kapara? One of the kaparas for the Chet HaEgel was a para aduma. And the Medrash says, Yavo ha'aim, let the mother of the Egel come and be mechaper. Why? Because they understood a leader is like an Egel, a power. He does it for you. But the real idea is that the leader is like a mother. True, the mother does it for the child. The mother feeds the child. The mother carries the child. But the tachlis is not that the mother should carry the child for the rest of his life or feed him for the rest of his life. The tachlis is that the mother teaches the child how to eat and how to walk. So that is the real purpose of a leader, more like the mother than like the Egel. So what does a leader then supposed to teach you? What is he supposed to do for you? How is he supposed to instill and inspire you to be able to do it for yourself? So really a tzibur is made up of three components. There's the Kahal, the Eda, and Yisrael. Kahal, Adas, Yisrael. And they all represent different aspects of what a tzibur is, what a kehila is. The Kahal is literally a congregation. Congregation means when people congregate together in one place physically and do things together. There's power in numbers. Enodome yochidos hamitzvah, l'rabim osem hamitzvah, b'rovam hadras melech. That's one aspect of a kehila. people working together at the same thing, the same project, Tefillah b'tzibur, Talmud Torah d'Rabim, and so on. That is the kahal. The Eidah is a different aspect. It's not necessarily people doing the same thing at the same time in the same place physically, but Eidah comes either from the lashon of Eidus. They all testify to the same values and standards and goals, or it could be that Eidah comes from the lashon of Ya'ad. They all have the same goal. They all have the same destination. They're all trying to go to the same place. So that is the Eidah. They don't have to be doing the same thing at the same time. What unites them is their common goals and common values and so on. And then there's Yisrael. Yisrael is the acronym for Yesh Shishim Ribui Osios LaTorah. Zohar says, the simple meaning of that Zohar is that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah, just like there are 600,000 root neshamas of Klal Yisrael, and every Jew, every root neshama has a letter corresponding to it. A very beautiful idea, but it's not true. There aren't 600,000 letters in the Torah. So you'll tell me, okay, it's a gematria, one or two doesn't make a difference. How many letters are there in the Torah? 304,855. It's about half of the 600,000. So something's wrong. There's not 600,000 letters in the Torah by a far, far difference. So the Pnei Yehoshua in Kedushin and Lamed Aleph speaks about this question, and he gives there 2 answers. I know about another 9 answers. But Lanias Daiti, there's no question. So you don't need any answers. The question would only be if it said, Yesh Shishim Ribui Osios Batorah, that there's 600,000 letters in the Torah. But it wouldn't spell Yisrael. It would spell Yisraab. In order to be Yisrael, it has to say, Yesh Shishim Ribui Osios La Torah. And therefore, I think it means something different, something another Zohar says. The Zohar also says, Yisrael, the Oraisa, the Kutshabrichu Chadu, that Klal Yisrael and the Torah are one. And therefore, the Zohar says, Yesh Shishim Ribui Osios La Torah. The 300,000 letters of the written Torah are not complete. That does not make a complete Torah. You have to add another 600,000 letters to the Torah to make it complete. And those 600,000 letters are not written letters. They're the letters of the neshamas of Klal Yisrael. Because in order for the Torah to be complete, Yisrael, the Oraisa, have to be connected. So, Yesh Shishim Ribui Osios La Torah. There are 600,000 letters that need to be added to the Torah in order for the Torah to be complete. And therefore, Yisrael represents the fact that every Jew is like a letter in the Torah. And just like every letter has to be written properly, and it has to be in its proper place, and if any letter is missing, the Sefer Torah is puzzled. So too, that Sefer Torah of the Neshamas of Klal Yisrael is the same. Everybody has their tafkid. Everybody has what they can contribute, what they can benefit from everybody else. Everybody is different. There's not one letter in the Torah that's similar to another, because even though there are only 22, 27 different letters, but their position makes them unique. So too, Klal Yisrael, every person is unique. Every person is different. And therefore, the purpose of the manhig is to deal with the kahal, with the Eidah, and with Yisrael. The kahal, he has to be a unifying factor in a kehillah. You need someone who's able to bring the kehillah together. You need somebody who will deal with the Eidah and strengthen the values and standards of the kehillah. And you need somebody who, like Moshe Rabbeinu said, Ish hala'eda elokei haruchos, just like the Rebbeinu Shalom knows the ruach of each person, somebody who can deal with the individuals in a kehillah and know what each one needs in order to be able to bring him up to his potential. And therefore, Chazal say that a tzaddik, when he comes to a place, brings with him three things. Like Rashi brings down in the beginning of Vayetze, Kozman Shatzadik Be'ir, Hu Ziva, Hu Hoda, Hu Hadar. Is the light and the glory and the beauty. And the Maral says light means that he enlightens people, teaches them Torah. One function of a Rav is to be a teacher, to be a person who teaches the Tzibur Torah. That's an extremely important function of a Rav. The second is that he brings them the beauty of mitzvahs, Hidr mitzvah, Hadar, teaches them how to be Makayim mitzvahs. He teaches them halacha, piskei halacha, and the beauty of mitzvahs. And then they hold the glory of mitzvahs bein adam lechavero, of interpersonal relationships. He helps the kehillah and teaches them how to function together. Those are the function of a Rav. And I think that's why two places in Pirkei Avos, it says, Aseh lecha Rav. One in the context of make yourself a Rav so you don't have doubts, and you are able to resolve your doubts and not keep Yiddishkeit in a doubtful way. And the other place in the context of Aseh lecha Rav, uknei lecha chaver. You have to also have friends. One represents the tafkid of the Rav as the Malamed, as the one who teaches Torah, who teaches mitzvahs, and so on. The second one is the Rav, who gives you eitzah, who gives you the ability to have proper interpersonal relationships, who's ma'ached the kehillah, who unifies the kehillah. That's the one who's similar to Knei lecha chaver. Those are basically the functions of a Rav. So that's something in this problem, when you have to decide who you want to fill that position. If you understand what the position should be, then you can discover who from the various candidates will fulfill, at best, all of those conditions, or the most of them vis-a-vis who will be able to fulfill those qualifications best. But there's another idea here, and this is perhaps the most difficult to describe, because it's a very personal and individual thing, and that is Aseh lecha Rav. In this process of a proba, it's not just in a vacuum who of the various candidates will fulfill the tafkid of a Rav as I described it, but who will fulfill that tafkid in the way that best suits my needs, which puts it into a very personal thing, and it's very different for different people. What each individual needs out of the Rav, right? Which area, which specific part of that tafkid of the Rav speaks to me most, is what I need most, which has to have the greatest emphasis, is different for different people, probably different for every person. So how do you make that shikul? And also, if you understand what you need from the Rav, example, somebody's a tremendous Talmid Chacham, probably knows more than the Rav knows. So he doesn't need the Rav to teach him, but he needs the Rav to inspire him. He needs the Rav to guide him, to give him eitzes, whatever. Another person may not need the Rav for inspiration or guidance. He needs the Rav for what's it called, for limud. He needs him to teach him. He doesn't know on his own. So each one has the same approach to what the Rav has to be. On the other hand, for each one, it's completely different which Rav they would pick. The one who is more of the Malamed, or the one who's the one of the more Meyayitz. This one needs this, and the other one needs the other. And therefore, who they would consider a better candidate is completely different. So how do you make that shikul? Especially if you want to do what's good for the tzibur, and the tzibur perhaps would benefit more from a Rav who has these qualifications rather than the other, whereas I would benefit more for the Rav with the other qualifications, but most of the tzibur needs the other qualifications. How do you make that shikul? So basically, sometimes what I need is so important to me, and the tzibur would also benefit from that. They may benefit more from a different kind of Rav, but my needs are so important that they outweigh the needs of the whole tzibur, and the tzibur will benefit if it has people like me that will benefit from this kind of Rav. The tzibur eventually will benefit also. The opposite is also true. Sometimes the needs of the tzibur for a certain kind of Rav are so important that even though I would rather have a different kind of Rav, but I know that a strong tzibur will benefit me too. So I'm willing to be mavater on what really would be good for me, because if it's really good for the majority of the tzibur and it'll create a more cohesive tzibur and a better tzibur, then I have to be mavater on what would be best for me and vote for the Rav that has the qualifications that are really necessary for the tzibur, even though I would rather vote for a different Rav that for me would be better, but the tzibur would not benefit as much as I would benefit, and therefore I have to be mavata for the sake of the tzibur. There's another aspect of this asay lecha Rav. Lecha can have another meaning. Lecha doesn't necessarily mean for your sake, but lecha can also mean sometimes as your representative. You have to take in consideration when you're choosing a Rav that aside from all the things the Rav does for the Kehillah, he also is a representative of the Kehillah to the world at large, to Klal Yisrael at large. And therefore, it's extremely important to take in consideration what that Rav represents. How is he going to represent the tzibur? And representing the tzibur means he represents every individual in that tzibur. How are you going to be looked upon by the Klal Yisrael, by the Kehilos around, right, based on who your Rav is going to be? Because your Rav represents you. And how the Kehillah is presented to the tzibur at large affects to a certain degree what kind of impact that tzibur can have without and within. How people look at themselves, what they consider themselves to be, how they're looked upon by others is extremely important. So you have to take that in consideration also. Not only how does this candidate fit the description of a Rav that I gave in the beginning? How does this candidate fulfill my specific needs of a Rav? And thirdly, how is this Rav going to represent our Kehillah to the Klal Yisrael in a way that will bring us kavod, in a way that will bring us to be proud of who we are and what Kehillah we belong to, and attract people to want to join the Kehillah, or Rahman al-San the other way? So that is also a very, very important cheshbon. There's also another cheshbon here in this specific prabha, and that is you were zoche to have a very, very choshev Rav, who fit probably more than I could describe what a Rav should be in all the areas that I brought out. Rabbi Malinowitz, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, is a person whose shoes are very hard to fill, if not impossible. So no one should compare any of the candidates to Rabbi Malinowitz, because there is no candidate that I can imagine that would fill his shoes completely. He was an Isha Eshkolos. So that should not be necessarily a consideration for that reason, but for another reason too. Chazal say that we learn from the pasuk, Bayom Hazeh Bo Midbar Sinai. Didn't say Bayom Ahu, but Bayom Hazeh B'chol Yom Yu Beinecha Kechadoshim. Every day the Torah should be new to you like it was given that day. It's very nice, but the Torah wasn't given that day. That day was Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Rosh Chodesh Sivan, they came to Midbar Sinai, and Torah wasn't given until 6 or 7 days later. So what do you tell me? The process of Matan Torah began on that day. It's not true. Because Chazal tell us that day the Rebbeinu Shalom said nothing to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu said nothing to Klal Yisrael. They were tired from traveling, so the Rebbeinu Shalom postponed the beginning of the process till the next day. So nothing happened that day. It wasn't even the beginning of the process of Matan Torah. So how can we learn from there that B'chol Yom Yu Beinecha Kechadoshim Ki'ilu Hayom Nitnu? I think that the limud is not that the Torah should be new and fresh and exciting. That we learn from other psukim in Kriya Shema. It's a different limud. I would imagine that the Rebbeinu Shalom has been waiting for that moment since the beginning of creation. When will come the time that I'll be able to give the Torah? You need the right number of people, the right place, the right timing, and now it came. There's the right number of people, the right place, the right timing. Let's get started. The Rebbeinu Shalom said, no, it's not conducive. People are tired. They need to rest. So the Rebbeinu Shalom assessed the situation and decided that the best thing to do is not to cheper the people today. That's what it means. B'chol yom yu beinecha kechadoshim. Every day you have to reassess the Torah according to the circumstances of the day. The Torah doesn't change, but how you relate to the Torah changes. People who are young relate to the Torah one way. When you get older, you relate a different way. Different situations call for different ways of relating to the Torah. And different times, it says, some say that that's the pshat, binu shno stor vador. Person has to be sensitive to the differences in different generations to know how to deal with the Torah differently in different generations. Example, the Michtav Eliyahu said that every generation has its specific Yetzer Hara. And the way to deal with it is to fight fire with fire, to fight the Yetzer Hara on his own grounds. Example, in the time of the Rambam, the Yetzer Hara was Greek philosophy, Aristotle. And the Rambam had to write Moreh Nevuchim to deal with the people who felt that if Aristotle said something, it's true, even if it contradicted the Torah. So he wrote Moreh Nevuchim to guide these perplexed people and bring them back to Torah. Now, somebody thinks that generations don't change. So the Maisa today, all the Kiruv organizations are irrelevant. Just print up Moreh Nevuchim, go into the pubs, call out these estranged youth, and tell them different parts of the Moreh Nevuchim, and that will be Makar of them. It won't be Makar of anybody. The Yetzer Hara of this generation is not Aristotle. They don't even know who he is. Probably think he's a rock star or something. The Maisa, that's not the Yetzer Hara of this generation. So, Binu Shnos Dor Vador. And therefore, Beis Tefillah is a shul, is a kehillah that's matured over the years. And it's not the same exact kehillah that Rabbi Malinowitz started and was involved with in the beginning. And that therefore it could be that the tzrachim of the shul change over the time. And you have to be sensitive to that also, of what Rav now at this point, it can be compared to a second marriage. The same cheshbonos that a person makes on his first spouse is not the same cheshbonos you make for a second marriage. Things change. People are different. They're older, whatever it may be. So here it's like a second marriage. And therefore could be that the cheshbonos are not exactly the same as they were when Rav Malinowitz Zecher Tzadik Livracha was the Rav. So that can't be a major cheshbon in making your mind up for which of the candidates you want to accept. Another idea is that a Rav has to be compatible to the tzibur, and what kind of Rav is compatible to the tzibur is one that knows how to deal with the people who are there as part of the kehillah. Kehillas are all different. Different rabbanim are good for different kehillas. Not just a matter of who has the greatest credentials and who will fulfill my needs or whatever, but who understands and who can relate to the kehillah that exists. You know, the Rabbi Bullman told me this Maisa once. He said there was the Chassam Sofer had a friend that he grew up with. They went to yeshiva together. They both became rabbanim. And the Chassam Sofer was very, very successful as a Rav. And this other Rav was not so successful. So he once asked the Chassam Sofer, how come, your kehillah, right, listens to you and follows you, and my kehillah, I'm not so successful with them. So the Chassam Sofer told him, did I ever demand from my kehillah something I thought that they couldn't do? So they always listen to me, because what I demand from them is what they can do. You demand from your kehillah things they can't do, so of course they don't listen to you. So you need a Rav who is compatible with the tzibur, who knows the tzibur. And knows the tzibur doesn't mean that he's going to be loved by everybody, because Chazal say that a Talmid Chacham who everybody likes, obviously he's doing his job, because he has to give Musar and Tochacha, whatever. So Talmid Chacham, as Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, that a Rav who the kehillah doesn't want to throw out is not a Rav, and the one that they actually throw out is not a mensch. So you have to be somewhere in between that. The Rav can't just be somebody that everybody likes, but somebody that everybody respects and understands that his kavanas are l'shem shamayim and l'shem the best interests of the kehillah, even if they're not so attractive and easy to accept. Okay, now comes the ikr, which I've been trying to avoid, but I guess I have no choice. To get to the third part is what you really want to hear from me, how to actually go through this process without, aside from gaining a Rav, gaining a lot of Averas. So first of all, you should know the Rabbeinu Yonah brings that it is a mitzvah to speak well, to speak good about Talmidei Chachamim and Tzaddikim. And the Meiri says also it's a mitzvah to speak the shevach of Talmidei Chachamim and Tzaddikim, called man shemaskim. Whenever you mention them, you should mention something good about them, and that way other people will learn from their ma'asim. So it's definitely an inyan to speak well of Talmidei Chachamim and Tzaddikim, and your candidates of Rabbonim fit that category, and therefore it's a mitzvah to speak well about them. And the converse is also true. Speaking negative things about Tzaddikim and Talmidei Chachamim is a terrible aveira. So how in the world can you have a prabha where you have to weigh positives and negatives of three different candidates and not be over the issue of speaking negatively about Tzaddikim and Talmidei Chacham? So first of all, when it comes to discussing the milas of the various candidates, one should try as hard as possible not to speak about the chesronos of any of the candidates, but the milas of the ones that you feel have the milas that you need or that the kehillah needs. To speak positively about the ones that you would want, why they have an edge over the others, than speaking about why the others don't have that edge or whatever. That's the first cloud. Try to be as positive as possible and bring out the positive aspect of the ones that you feel, or the one you feel is the right one for the Kehillah, rather than denigrating the ones that you feel are not the right ones. That's the first cloud. As much as you can, do that, that's the best thing. The fact that there has to be a process like this is important, because just as much as in the shidduch, it's important to know who you're marrying, and you have to get information. And if people withhold information and aren't honest, right, about the negatives of the prospective spouse, then they're causing tremendous damage, possibly for the future. So here it's like a shidduch, and just like by a shidduch, telling information that's l'to'eles is not only mutter, but many times a chiyuv. The same thing goes here. It could be this is even more important than a shidduch. A shidduch is just two people. Only two people can suffer from a shidduch. Usually there's also collateral damage too in a bad shidduch. But in any case, here you're dealing with hundreds of people and a lot of collateral damage and a lot of direct damage. So it's a mitzvah to be able to discuss properly the different candidates and pick the right one. And if there are negative things, then that's also permissible and sometimes a chiyuv to say, but it has to be said with the right guidelines, which the Chafetz Chaim gives in Shmiras Halashon for giving over things that are a toelis, which we will delineate in a few minutes. However, even speaking about the milas of the candidate that you think is the right one, if you know that you're doing it in front of people who want some other candidate and are going to come because of the shevach that you're giving to your candidate to denigrate him, then it's also to do that too. You're not allowed to be mishabeach somebody too much in front of people you know that will take that shevach and say, but. If you know that but is coming, then you have to but out and not speak too much about the mileage even of the candidate that you prefer. When there is a tzorech to mention negative things about a candidate, I think that perhaps, I'm not telling you what I'm 100% sure about, so you can do with what you want with it. But I think that if the board or that committee that's in charge of this search and proba process would put out a sheet of what they consider the strong points of each candidate and the weak points of each candidate. So people could use that as a guidepost without having to have everybody say their piece publicly or whatever, and use that as a guide. It may reduce the chances of lashon hara or whatever. I'm not sure if that's a good idea or not. It would seem to me that it may be something that is positive. Think about it and see if you can implement it or if you should implement it. When there is a necessity to bring out, either people want to can influence other people that don't have a 100% day of one way or the other, and need to be influenced as to which candidate is the best for the shul or the best for the individuals in the shul. And people therefore want to influence other people. That's also okay to do. But again, the best thing to do is to try to influence the positive of the candidate you think should be the one to be chosen, and not to denigrate the others. But even where it's necessary to point out negatives about any one of the candidates, that you feel that this is such an important thing, it would be detrimental to the shul to choose that candidate, and you feel very strongly about it, then in order to be able to be mutter, to say it to someone else, you have to have a few different conditions, which are the conditions for any kind of situation where you're saying something for a toelis, and there is definitely a toelis from this. First of all, is the only way you can reach this toelis by saying this negative thing? Or could you possibly convince someone not to vote for that candidate by not having to denigrate this one, but by strengthening and speaking positively about a different candidate, and that way influence the person? That's one possibility. Secondly, if there really is a negative that you feel that not negative necessarily about the candidate himself, but vis-a-vis his being the Rav of your Kehillah specifically, that this would be a negative for the Kehillah, even though it may not be negative about the person himself. In a different Kehillah, it may be a Ma'ila. You have to first of all know that for sure that chisaron exists. If you don't know for sure firsthand, then if you try to speak to someone and explain to them that you think that this is a negative, you have to tell them that you don't know that firsthand for sure, but you've heard that, you've surmised that, you think that. It's your subjective opinion. Okay, you have to make that clear. That's another condition. Another condition is that you can only say it if you have no personal negias about that person, and your kavana is purely for the sake, your sake of who you feel you'll benefit as a Rav, who you feel the community will benefit more as a Rav, and why this negative aspect would be a detriment to you or to the community or whatever, but not something that you have some kind of negias where has nothing to do with who's better as a Rav or not, just you have some vendetta against that Rav for some reason, and therefore want to besmirch him. That's 100% osur, even if in the end, right, it could be a toelis, but it has to be done without any kind of malice. And if you know that you have that malice, then keep your mouth shut. Another condition is that you have to at least try to minimize what negative things you say to get the point across, but not to exaggerate it, and not to mention extraneous points that really aren't relevant to the proba process. Another thing is that if there are different kinds of chesronos, there are chesronos that really could affect the entire kehillah that are objective chesronos. There are chesronos that people have that are basically subjective. In other words, it's not really a chesaron either for the kehillah or in the person himself, but vis-a-vis me, in my approach to what a Rav is, my relationship with a Rav, this is something negative about a candidate that personally would be negative to me. There, to put that out as a objective negative is 100% a shekel. It's only a very subjective negative. So if you really feel that there are other people in the kehillah that have the same subjective negative from that candidate, then it has to be clear that it's something only subjective. It's only vis-a-vis how you see things, not necessarily a negative objectively about the person. And again, the negative things should be minimized. Any things that people have to say should lechatchila just be in favor of the candidate that you favor. If you feel that that's very important, that other people hear that and perhaps can be influenced, because you really think that that's what is best for the Kehillah, instead of speaking negatively about the other candidates, if necessary, to speak negative, and there are certain situations where that is necessary, then to keep the guidelines halachically of how you're allowed to say something negative, litoeles, keeping the guidelines that we mentioned. Lamaisa, if everybody, and having a meeting like this is like the host said, is probably something that has never happened before, and Lamaisa is a very big schus for your Kehillah, and it also says something very special about the Kehillah. And I think that it says something very special about Rabbi Malinowitz, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, that he created a Kehillah and guided it to be able to have such a sensitivity, to want such a shear, right? So, Lamaisa, you qualify to be a Knessia L'Shem Shamayim. And a Knessia L'Shem Shamayim, the Rebbeinu Shalom guarantees, will be so full of sky that a kiyum will come from it, that the proper Rav will be chosen, and Amir Hashem, the Kehillah will go, and may Chayil El Chayil, and will be able to reach its potential, and also be a shining light, as we mentioned, with your new Rav, a shining light to Klal Yisrael and to the other Kehillahs, and represent what your Kehillah not only is, but the potential it has to what it can be. And that's very important also. You want a Rav who's not just going to maintain you where you are, but build you as a Kehillah, build each and every one of you as individuals in all different ways, and represent what your Kehillah should represent to the world at large, the Hagdul Torah Ulahadira. I wish you a lot of success. I don't know if maybe you should have had a meeting like this to choose the person who would lead this shiur, right, in the best possible way. So maybe you lost out on that. But in any case, if I've helped you at all, I hope that it'll be a schus for me and for my family, especially in this time of sakonis nefashos worldwide. Everybody needs a lot of zechuyos. I thank you for the opportunity to gain this schus, and we should hear only good things. And Amir Hashem, we shouldn't have to have a meeting to decide who should be Melech HaMashiach. He should come B'karo B'yomeinu.
Amen. Thank you very so much, Rav Leff. Before I start into the questions, I just wanted to give a special Hakara Satov to Rav Barak Staffer, who was the person who came up with the idea of having this year and who pushed it forward. And as everyone can tell, we're very grateful to Barak for the idea, and of course to Rav Leff for agreeing to put this year together, and to the Mrs. Blass for sponsoring this year. Thank you so much to everyone. The first question I'd like to ask is, how at all should the Kehillah factor in the aspects of a potential Rav's age and experience?
It depends. Let's start with experience. Experience can be a very important thing, but there's two kinds of experience. You know, I really was going to start this whole thing of telling you that you picked me a very, very good person to give this shiur, because I consider myself a well-polished rabbi. Now, if that sounds haughty, let me explain to you what I consider a well-polished rabbi. A well-polished rabbi is somebody who's had the floor mopped with him a few times. So sometimes experience can be learning from your mistakes, and Shiva Yipol Tzadik Vikom. So a Rav that maybe doesn't have such positive experience, but sometimes negative experience is also important. Age-wise, I think it was Rav Lapian, I'm almost sure was, I think, 80 years old, and they wanted to choose a mashgiach in Kfar Hasidim. I'm almost sure this was the Maisa. And somebody said, Maisa, he's a little old for the job. And I don't remember who it was, Chazon Ish or whatever, said he'll be able to function for many, many years. And age is not necessarily a chisaron. Neither is a young age a chisaron. That's something surely that's also lishtanos, hopefully. So I don't think that age or experience is an ikr. If you get to know the person and you know they have potential, then it could be that if they're young and fresh and don't have that much experience, but they're the kind of people that have natural experience is just as good as people who've had experience that's not so positive altogether. And age, we're not talking here about people who are zakenim uflogim. We're talking about people who, Baruch Hashem, are middle-aged people. I don't think that that's an issue in your situation.
Thank you. Daniel Michaels pointed out that just as we're all today meeting on Zoom in electronic format, he wanted to know, what is the suitable forum for these kinds of discussions? How limited does the circulation need to be? One-on-one, is it okay to post messages, to have email communications to groups? What's appropriate?
I think, first of all, it should be limited only to people who are Nogeyan making this decision. This year was general, other people could benefit from. When it comes to actually discussing candidates, it should be limited definitely only to people who have a daya and who are involved in this process. I guess that's members of the shul. Pretty much, I think that's the limitation. Whether it should be done one-on-one, I think is not really practical. And there should be, I saw that they wrote me that Rabbi Berkowitz suggested that there definitely be an open membership meeting where people can say what they have to say. I pretty much agree with that. If it's done, again, with the knowledge that it's not a hefkerveld, that there are halachas of what you can say and what you can't say, even with toelis. So if people are apprised ahead of time of the simple halachic limitations of what they can say and what not, and there is a moderator whose job is to make sure that people do not go out of bounds. And if somebody's going out of bounds, to say that, this is not proper and we're cutting you off from, it's easier to cut off on a thing like this than in person. So there's a mile of having a meeting like this. You can mute people, right? I never had that possibility even by meetings by us, right? My Kehillah would love to have that possibility at drushes or whatever to put on a mute. But in any case, that is a possibility and it should be exercised. But I think that when it comes to the actual process of voicing opinions, it should be only those people that it's nogeya to and that are members who have a vote, and therefore there's a real toelis to them one way or the other.
Thank you. That leads into another question that we have. Somebody wrote in who is a member of the shul and therefore understands that he has a voting right, but he doesn't daven in the shul, and he cares very much about the shul, but isn't sure, should he get involved? Should he even exercise his vote if he's not really even davening at the shul?
First of all, you know that they say that yesh lo meya, yesh lo deya. Somebody who feels important enough to donate to the shul and be a member, right? When he'll get upset with the shul that he's davening in, at least he has another shul to go to that he's a member of. So he does have a vested interest in this kehillah thriving. He shows an interest enough to put his money where his mouth is. If he really has a strong daya of who should be the Rav of the shul because he feels that this kehillah or whatever is a benefit to Klal Yisrael and he wants to be part of it, even if he doesn't feel that he wants to daven with the kehillah, then he has a right to voice an opinion. If he doesn't have such a strong opinion, he doesn't feel it's going to affect him one way or the other, then he should, on his own, refrain from being involved.
Thank you. The next question is fairly long, and I'm going to read it exactly as it's written. At the end of the process, we are all going to be faced with only one of two scenarios. Number one, individually, we will be undecided or torn between which of the contenders is best for our families or community. Or number two, we will have a good inclination to go with one particular Rav. As far as the first scenario, it's pashut that we will do what we always do when faced with an important life decision. We would consult with a Rav who knows us as individuals and as a community to assist us with his das. However, since this is not an obstacle that we have faced before, and since this decision carries so much importance, the questioner is thinking that maybe it's advisable, even lechatchila, to ask a Rav, even in the second scenario, when we do have an inclination towards one of the contenders to get the das of the Rav. Could Rav Leff give us some advice in this regard?
Yeah. In both scenarios, one should go to a person that they usually ask Eitzah from. In the first scenario, they should tell the person, we have 2 or 3 candidates. We really don't know who's best. Give him the information of each one. Let him know that you're don't have any strong feeling one way or the other, and hear what he has to say. Anybody who gives an Eitzah das Torah properly is not going to tell you what to do. He's going to tell you what the considerations are that you should then make the proper choice. In the second scenario, you should go to that same person and say, I have a feeling strongly that this is the person. I just want to run it by you and hear if you have anything to add or subtract from that strong feeling. So in each case, you're asking an Eitzah, just let the person know what scenario you're asking the Eitzah from.
Thank you. Is it mutter for a husband and wife to speak to each other about the process? Is there any differences in the halachas of Lashon Hara when we're talking about a husband and a wife talking to each other?
Again, with the carefulness of the halachas of Toelis, right? Yeah, a husband and wife are going to have to be part of a kehillah with a Rav, have to relate to the Rav. It's to the husband's best interest that the Rav is the kind of Rav that his wife will respect, and vice versa. And therefore, it's a tremendous toelis for them to speak together to hear what each one has to say of who they feel would be the Rav that they could best relate to and best relate to them. Yeah, and again, with the same zahirus of doing it in a way that fits the tanoim of when you're allowed to speak with toelis.
Thank you. Someone has a question here. Does the Rav have advice how to possibly prevent division within the members who may choose differently from each other? How can the community come together at the end of the process, regardless of what the outcome may be? Are there any steps that could be taken ahead of time to be unified, regardless of what that final outcome may be?
That's a good question. It depends. I'm not familiar with how strongly different factions of the Kehillah feel about different candidates. If the Metzias is that there is a segment of the community that really, and I've seen other probas like this, that there's a segment of the community is very, very strongly behind one candidate and very much against the other candidate or candidates. And another segment of the community that is the opposite. Then you're going to have a problem if one person gets in. Obviously, the other side is going to feel they lost, and it's the candidate they didn't want, not just the one they wanted didn't get in. Then I think at that point, you need maybe another shiur, or maybe face the reality that you're going to have a breakaway shul. I don't think that that's the situation here. If people, have a candidate that they would like, but they could live with the other ones, then I think once the Kehillah makes a decision, I think everybody could come around and realize that they didn't have any specific negative about any of them. They would have preferred something else, but if this is the Metzias, I think the caliber of the people in your Kehillah will be able to accept it and unite around that Rav who was chosen. That's my gut feeling. I don't think that it's the first scenario. If it is the first scenario, I think that at that point, you're going to have emergency meetings to decide how to deal with it.
Thank you. We'll take a few more questions. I just want to encourage the tzibor. I do have a few more questions in the queue. If anyone has any more questions, please do send them in now. Rav Leff spoke about how right now the shul is not the same place as when Rav Melinowitz Zatzal was in charge. How much should we be voting based on the future of the shul? How much emphasis should we put on the future as opposed to what the current needs are? Because those current needs are not necessarily the same as what the future goals and directions of where the ship should be heading.
Okay, all those people in the shul who are Nevi'im should only vote on what the future is going to be. The ones that are not Nevi'im, right, should basically take in consideration where the shul is now, but based on where it is now and where it would like to be and what potential it has to grow, to take that also into consideration. But the major consideration is what at this point, right, and that takes in the potential for growth too, which of the candidates would best serve the needs of the Kehillah in a way that will give them the incentive to grow to their potential.
Rav Melinowitz Zatzal was very...
I'll make one correction. I didn't say that the Kehillah now is very much different than when Rav Melinowitz had quite a few years there. When he started with the Kehillah, it was a different kind of Kehillah than it grew into now. So what Rav Melinowitz was dealing with is not that much different than it is now, but it is different than when it started with Rabbi Melinowitz was involved with it to begin with. That's the major difference. Not such a major difference between what was a few months ago and is now.
Okay, this may be on the same lines. A question somebody asked is, should a person be voting based on what he thinks is best for the Kehillah, or perhaps if it's different, what he thinks is best for his family? And I would like to add to that question, based on the lines of what the Rav just said, that it may be that the parents have different needs than the children, even though the parents are certainly mashpim on the children. And perhaps it might be more important for the future of the community to have a Rav who has a channel of communication with the youth, as opposed to one who is less involved with the youth.
Okay, I thought that I dealt with that partially in what I spoke about, where there is a conflict between the kind of Rav that you really would benefit from, but the Tzibur would benefit more from a different Rav, right? What's the main thing? I think the general answer to that is the following. You have to make a shikul. How important is it, your needs, right? If the other candidate would get in, how devastating would that be to your needs? But it would be beneficial to the Kehillah, or vice versa. That if the other candidate got in, it wouldn't be so devastating to you, but if your candidate got, it'd be more devastating to the Kehillah. Weigh them out. How devastating would be to the youth, as opposed to how devastating it would be to you or to the Kehillah. Weigh them all out, and the one that is the most intense, that's the one you should go after.
That answer may answer the following question that just came in. The candidates that we have are all very exceptional, and the decision is extremely difficult. Aside from tossing a coin, what would the pivotal quality be that would determine the choice between the candidates?
That's a very subjective and individual question, and I was not asked to give my opinion on the candidates.
Okay. If someone cannot decide between the three candidates, which one he would prefer, should he vote? Should he not vote?
There's two ways of not deciding. There's not deciding. I can't say 100%. I have a feeling that this one would be better, but I can't really say 100%. Yeah, then a person should vote according to his feeling. Person has no clue, right? All of them would be fine, right? None of them would be fine, right? Then if he has a quarter, he should flip it. And if he doesn't, he should not vote.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. That is the final question that we have here. One moment, there's just one more just came in, I'm sorry. Okay, the question about a majority is really a question, it's an issue for the board. I'm actually going to skip that. Okay, I don't, Mr. Reb W, if you'd like to rephrase your question, I can try to do the second part of the question again. Anyone else have questions? Dr. Callis, would you like to make us some final words before we end the evening? Or the Rav, perhaps, with Jacobson.
Yes, I think that Rabbi Jacobson should be the Messiah.
Rav Jacobson, could you unmute your microphone, please? Thank you.
Wish to express our deep hakara satoiv to Rav Leff, and may the Torah that we've learned now and the hishtadlus involved in having this shir, and the schus of Harav Melinowitz Zatzal, and the schus of Harav Leff, who gave of his neshama for this shir, grant us with the siyata d'shmaya, not only to get to the best possible place at the end of the process, but that this process itself should be one of hidur, of kvod shamayim, and the very fact that this is something that could be negative, chalila, is itself what provides that much greater place to shine as a Kehila and show Hashem, look how we came through this in terms of Shalom, in terms of Kvod Chachamim, in terms of Shmiras Haloshen. Yashar Koach again to Harav Leff, a big Yashar Koach.
Okay, I just want to say a big Yashar Koach to Rabbi Jacobson for filling in a very difficult spot. And the Mitzvah Hashem, it should be a tremendous chus for him that someday he should be on the other end of this proba in a kehila that's roy to have such a choshev harav.
Yashar Koach.